Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, and thank you for joining me this evening on Tuesday, October 5th, 2021. And if you would like additional weather information, in addition to what I speak of here this evening, you can go to weather.gov/Alaska or reach out to me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. Happy to hear from you. Pass along any interesting photos, reports, or comments. Looking at our headlines, we're in the midst now of Alaska Winter Weather Preparedness Week. Winter weather snuck up on us early this year by at least a few weeks, and we continue to see winter weather advisories and warnings currently in effect. There is an area of low pressure out there in the Bering and an occluded front that is working its way inland. It's producing rain and snow as it moves into the interior. Some of that snow will be on the heavier side, where winter storm warnings are in effect for the southern Brooks Range down through the mid-Yukon, and we have winter weather advisories, the northern Susitna valleys, particularly up north of Talkeetna around Cantwell and up through Broad Pass. Progressive pattern, this is a rather progressive active pattern, will continue as we head into mid-October, though the storm track may shift a little further south so that the Alaska Peninsula, southwest parts of the state, south central areas into the Panhandle will be seeing most of the action, and it may let up a bit there up toward the Brooks Range and North Slope. But here are the current warnings, advisories, watches that we have in effect. There was a winter storm warning in effect that'll continue into Thursday for portions of the south slopes of the Brooks Range into the central Yukon Valley, including Bettles, Galena, and Tanana. And keep in mind, the heaviest snows, 6 to 12 inches, are going to fall, especially in elevations around and above 2,000 feet. There's also winter weather advisories for the areas west of Ambler, there on the west side of the Brooks Range, as well as down in the northern Susitna Valley, especially north of Talkeetna, including Broad Pass. Also has been issued a wind advisory for the central and parts of the eastern Alaska Range that include the Denali Park Highway as well as Isabel Pass, where southerly winds out ahead of this front as it works its way inland could gust as high as 50 to 60 miles an hour. And then also on Thursday, we have a high wind watch for Unalaska or the Dutch Harbor areas. There's going to be yet a second pretty potent little low that works its way up through the lower Bering and crosses the central eastern Aleutians into the lower Alaska Peninsula as we head through Thursday. Here's the precipitation forecast. And heaviest precipitation on Wednesday will be confined to areas along the north central Gulf around Cordova on up through Prince William Sound. And that moisture will also be up along the western arm of the Alaska Range and areas west of Fairbanks up there toward the middle Yukon Valley between McGrath and Bettles. Some areas that will pick up several inches of snow. Now the air is going to be getting warmer, so the precipitation on the west side is transitioning over to rain. And the snow, the colder air that's in the interior will be eroding away, so that Fairbanks is going to have some sloppier weather here as we go from Wednesday night into Thursday, with the precipitation initially starting as some snow, but then changing, mixing with and then changing to rain on Thursday. And by Thursday, though, the precipitation across the interior will not be as heavy as what it was for the day on Wednesday. So in continuation with our Winter Preparedness Week, talk a bit about sea ice. And we've already reached that point now where some new ice is beginning to develop there along the Arctic coast, as well as the northwest coast into parts of Kotzebue Sound. Sea ice is inherently unstable and dangerous. You have strong winds out there, and underwater currents can cause that ice to move around and break up. And when we have cracks in that ice, they can be hidden by snow, and the larger areas of ice that break away can separate from the land and leave you stranded. So one thing as we prepare for the winter, know your forecast. Whiteouts and extreme cold are common in the wintertime out there on the ice, and tell someone about your plans before you head out. One other thing, ice fog, and that tends to be an issue especially in the east central interior in the vicinity of Fairbanks. It forms when we have really strong cold Arctic high pressure and a very bitterly cold air mass with calm conditions. The temperature inversion sets up, that is, the air just a bit above the surface is warmer than the colder air at the surface, and as a result, it acts as a lid and traps any pollutants in the air that may be introduced by automobiles or airplanes or from burning wood. And as a result, that poor air quality can affect especially younger people and the elderly and those with respiratory problems. So keep that in mind as we begin to head deeper into the winter season. So looking at the satellite imagery today, we have the cloud cover there increasing through the western Gulf in response to a little frontal wave as the occluded front works its way into the southwest parts of the state. The low back out still southwest of St. Lawrence Island, with additional moisture coming up through the central Aleutians. And overall, this kind of pattern is going to continue. We're going to see storms either coming in off the Bering or North Pacific and working their way eastward across the state. And I think overall the pattern will remain active, and the storm track may shift a little bit in time, a little further south, especially as we get into next week. But here's the current scenario: low pressure there west of, southwest, I should say, of St. Lawrence, with the occluded front pushing into the southwest interior, a little frontal wave developing near and south, just southeast there of Kodiak Island, with some precipitation now spreading up into Cook Inlet. Back to the west, we have areas of rain with another little disturbance back up to just to the north there of the western and central Aleutians. And as we go through tonight, that low will be passing just southwest of St. Lawrence. The initial lead front will kind of wash out, with a secondary front developing and pushing additional rain and milder temperatures inland. And then as we go through Wednesday afternoon, there'll be yet another secondary frontal wave develop there in the vicinity between Kodiak Island and the Kenai, and that will bring and become a low that sits out over the northern Gulf for a bit. And if you look off to the south and west, the lower left corner of your screen, there's another low coming in. That'll quickly move northeastward, crossing the central Aleutians, and that's the one that could produce some higher winds in the vicinity of Dutch Harbor on Thursday. And that'll be the next weather maker to spread more additional precipitation into the southwest portions of the state, the Alaska Peninsula, on up into south central areas here to round out the week. So low temperatures for Wednesday morning, where there is some clearing, will dip down below freezing in the inner waterways of the southeast. There could also be areas of dense fog redevelop like they have been doing the past couple of nights, so keep that in mind. Back to the west, clouds will be thickening, precipitation overspreading the area from southwest to east-northeast. And where skies are partly cloudy this evening, you still see temperatures drop down below freezing there around Glen Allen up toward the Elkan border. And then temperatures Wednesday afternoon will generally be in the 40s across much of the area, though some 50s, lower 50s will be possible. Ketchikan, Craig, also on over toward Homer, and maybe 54, 55 at Kodiak. Thursday morning, lows will be down around or below freezing from Talkeetna eastward, but above freezing Anchorage to the south and west. Generally mid-upper 30s to around 40 in through the Panhandle. And on Thursday afternoon, we'll see highs in the Panhandle, mid-40s to near 50 degrees. And a little better overall, 40s to lower 50s across south central areas. Along the Arctic coast, temperatures will be below freezing, as well as in through the Brooks Range, generally teens and 20s. A little milder back toward the Seward Peninsula, remaining above freezing, as well as down into the southwest, the YK deltas. And then as we go through Wednesday, temperatures along the Yukon River will be warming back up around or above 40, especially there you get west of Fairbanks. The higher elevations, though, above 2,000 feet, should stay mainly snow, especially the south side of the Brooks Range, and the snow will be wet and on the heavy side. Thursday morning, look for temperatures to generally be down near freezing along the Yukon River, especially from areas around, Tanana, Galena, eastward. And then still above freezing off toward the west, and temperatures Thursday afternoon will generally be around or a bit above 40 along and south of the Yukon River, and in the 30s off to the north. Taking a look at the southwest peninsula, morning lows will generally be above freezing, so any snow will be confined to some higher elevations there, especially the western arm of the Alaska Range, and lows generally in the 40s out across the peninsula and into the Aleutian chain. Highs Wednesday afternoon will be well into the 40s across the southwest interior. lower 50s along the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, and lows Thursday morning. Most areas will be above freezing, mid-30s to at least lower 40s, with some mid-40s possible there as we get out along the Alaska Peninsula, with highs Thursday afternoon and a briefly warmer push of air there up across the peninsula, with readings in the lower, even mid-50s. So a quick check of the temperature outlook for October 11th through the 15th. It's calling for temperatures to average below normal over the southeast, and particularly centered on the northern panhandle, and a bit so over the northern and eastern parts of the state along the Alcan. And precipitation is looking to average below normal along the Brooks Range for a change. So maybe a little break, a little drier pattern, suggesting the storm track will shift a little farther south. Nevertheless, between now and mid-month, the southwest part of the state is going to see above normal precipitation, and we're going to see a series of storms moving in off the lower Bering or North Pacific that will impact southwest parts of the state, including the Alaska Peninsula on in through south central areas around Cook Inlet. And so it'll remain a rather active pattern here as we head into next week.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time for your flight weather, and if you are planning a flight Wednesday into Thursday, we do have an area of low pressure that will be moving into the west, Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, and trailing from that an occluded front that'll work its way inland with a lot of moisture, bringing winter precipitation, snow, and some mix before transitioning to rain over coastal areas of the west and southwest, as well as the interior, as a little milder air creeps in along this occluded front. Triple point will help spin up another low across the Alaska Peninsula and up toward Kodiak Island, and then eventually up into the north central Gulf by the time we get into Thursday. And IFR conditions will be rather extensive across much of the southwestern half of the state, including Cook Inlet, the Kenai, Kodiak Island, back through the interior southwest and Seward Peninsulas. And on Thursday morning, look for the IFR conditions to spread further eastward up into the northern Gulf and northern Panhandle. Also rather extensive IFR conditions along and just south of the Brooks Range to the Yukon River and westward through the Seward Peninsula, and again, still much of the southwest. Some improvement by Thursday afternoon, though still rather extensive IFR expected in the north along and north of the Brooks Range through the North Slope and Arctic coast. Also, the next low pressure system will be tracking on the north side of the Aleutians across the lower Bering, and that'll have an area of IFR conditions working its way up through the eastern Aleutians on up into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Past conditions on Wednesday, AKwx will see IFR conditions try and become MVFR. That'll also be the case for Adigan. And as we go further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill will be socked in with IFR conditions, as will Rainy to start IFR with MVFR. Better chance of MVFR being at least briefly to the north, and that'll be the case as we go, especially through the northern part of the Alaska Range. Look for windy pass to be IFR becoming MVFR, though IFR conditions will tend to hold on the south entrance and become MVFR to the north. Isabel generally should hold on to MVFR conditions on Wednesday, and Mentasta should be able to stay VFR, being the farthest east. As we drop back toward the south and west, that moisture coming in out ahead of that occluded front, Tanita, as well as Portage, will be IFR on Wednesday. And then in the northern panhandle for Chilkoot and White, we'll see VFR conditions there continuing, though areas of the panhandle could see some areas of dense fog redevelop Tuesday night into early Wednesday morning, as been the case past couple of nights. Freezing levels are highest along this occluded front as it works its way into the southwest interior. We are looking at freezing levels around and above 6,000 to 8,000 feet there in the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and a little intrusion, at least of a little milder area across the west side of the state. And that'll translate to the greatest icing potential along that frontal system, between 9,000 and a flight level of 21,000 feet for areas the western Gulf and around Kodiak Island. And then across much of the southwest up toward the lower Seward Peninsula between 6,000 and 14,000 feet, and generally above 4,000 feet as you get toward the south side of the Brooks Range. Upper level jet stream winds are strongest. There's a jet core of 100, 110 knots diving from north to south there along the Panhandle to Haida, and then back to the west, a broad area of strong 120, 130 knot jet max from the west-northwest out over the Aleutians. And then dropping down to 9,000 feet, we see broad area of winds 50 plus knots over the southwestern part of the state in through the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. And then finally, as we get down to 3,000 feet, we can see a core of winds 45, 50 knots out over the east-southeast Bering along the southwest coast, including Bristol Bay, and coming in across the Alaska Peninsula. That will translate to the likelihood of some moderate turbulence, especially from, well, there's a little pocket there up along the west end of the Brooks Range, surface to 4,000 foot turbulence, and then a broad area of surface to 4,000 foot turbulence anticipated across much of the southwest, nudging into the western northern Alaska range, because there'll be some gustier south winds in some of the passes and higher elevations there, and then finally extending down the length of the Alaska Peninsula in through the eastern and central Aleutians, surface to 3,000 foot turbulence will be possible. So that is your flight weather. If you are able to get out, certainly have a very safe flight. Otherwise, hunker down until the weather improves.
So the sun, looking here from the ground, seems very constant and quiet. But actually, when we look at it from space, we can see it's quite turbulent and active. Space weather is activity on the sun and in the near-Earth space that can affect our technological infrastructure and society. The sun is constantly spewing out a stream of particles called the solar wind that goes out into the solar system. And it affects us here near Earth, where we're protected by a magnetic field. The interaction between the solar wind and the magnetic field can cause space weather. The Carrington event is the largest storm we've seen in recorded history when we're looking at space weather. But every solar cycle, which repeats about every 11 years, one estimate estimates that there's a 10% chance of getting a large storm like the Carrington event that could impact us here on Earth. But we see solar storms almost all the time. And these storms have an effect on our technological infrastructure. Solar storms can cause activity in Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere that can damage electrical power grids that power our communities, interrupt radio and satellite communications, and can cause our GPS navigation to fail. NOAA is working with its international partners to ensure that we have different vantage points where we can observe space weather. Our space weather observing infrastructure from space includes the NOAA Discover satellite and the NASA ACE satellite that are stationed upstream of Earth to give us a first buoy measurement of the solar wind. It also includes the ESA-NASA SOHO satellite and the NASA Stereo satellite that image the sun and also make coronagraph measurements of the outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona, that can tell us when large explosions happen off the sun. We also observe the sun and the Earth's magnetic field from the geostationary location with NOAA's GOES. So the way we use the space weather information from satellites and from the ground is to be able to make forecasts and predictions, just like we do with hurricanes and terrestrial weather. We observe the sun and look for activity and see how it develops, and see if it's going to culminate into a large explosion that can affect us here on Earth. NOAA is working with its international partners to expand our observing capability. We're committed to observing along the Sun-Earth line. So we're going to do the imaging of the sun and the upstream buoy measurements of the solar wind along the Sun-Earth axis. more we understand about the sun, the more we can prepare for it and become, just like we are a weather-ready nation, become a space weather-ready nation. And as we look forward to humans exploring out into the solar system and advancing our space commerce activities, space weather becomes more and more important.
Here at the Space Weather Prediction Center, we monitor space activity as it's occurring back at the sun, and then we issue out a forecast as well as alerts, watches, and warnings as activity is occurring. A typical space weather event would start with a solar flare back at the sun. That solar flare is short-lived and produces fairly short-lived impacts as well, basically impacting communications on the daylit side of the Earth. However, some solar flares are also associated with a coronal mass ejection or an eruption of plasma that's blasted off the sun and out into space. As forecasters, it's our job to determine if that cloud of plasma is moving towards Earth, and if it comes towards Earth, what the potential impacts may be. Those impacts can range from a fairly low-level storm that may produce the aurora a little bit farther south than usual, or can range up into fairly significant magnetic disturbances that don't happen very often, but when they do, they can impact technologies and infrastructure here on Earth. We provide information to lots of different user groups, from airlines to the electric power grid, to emergency managers, aviation, satellite community, lots of different customers.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and moving along to our marine weather. We continue to watch the sea ice developing slowly but surely, and we do have some fingers of ice that have developed there up in the Arctic Ocean, Beaufort Sea, and those are going to be most susceptible to some of the winds up there to get blown around a bit because it is new ice for this season. Otherwise, there are some other areas of ice near the shoreline that will continue to slowly build as we head deeper into the fall. Well, on Wednesday, the marine forecast for the Panhandle shows winds either southeast to south around 10 knots or variable, and waves only a couple of feet. Along the Gulf Coast, the outer areas, we'll see winds westerly 10 knots, 5-footers west of Sitka and Craig, turning more south and southeasterly, Gustavus on up to and west of Yakutat, with waves only about 4 feet. Then on Thursday, as low pressure gets situated in the Gulf, it's going to help turn winds around to the southeast across much of the area. 15 knots the inner canals, though it could be as high as 30 knots there toward Dixon Entrance, with waves generally a few feet, but a little higher, 8-9 feet. Dixon Entrance, and then gale force winds to 35 knots along the outer banks there, with waves of 8 to 10 feet. And then on Wednesday for south central areas, winds will be out over the Gulf, southeast to south in the 20 to maybe 30 knot range. There will be a little more wind in through Prince William Sound, 30 knots from the east, with waves perhaps as high as 8-9 feet. And then southerly winds through Cook Canal, especially lower Cook Canal at the mouth there, 25 to 30 knots with waves around 8 feet. And then on Thursday, as a trough works its way across the Kenai, winds will shift a bit more toward the west and southwest at about 20 to 25 knots, waves running 6 to 7 feet there at the mouth of Cook Inlet and off of Kodiak, and as well as off of Seward to the south. And then looking at the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on the North Pacific and Gulf side, winds will be generally southwest to west, 25 knots, waves 7 to 9 feet. But on the Bering side, look for 35-knot gales from the southwest to west, just past Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay, with waves building upwards of 10 and 15 feet. And then on overall, winds will be southwesterly, turning more southerly as you come out along the Alaska Peninsula, picking up to 30 knots, and there's going to be a core of stronger winds moving through the eastern Aleutians on Thursday, so beware of that. Waves 7 to 8 feet on the North Pacific Gulf side and around 9 feet on the Bering side. And then For Wednesday, winds will generally be west to southwest across the 25, briefly as high as 35 knots there just to the north of Dutch Harbor. Waves around 10 feet on the North Pacific side and 10 to 14 feet on the Bering side. And then with a secondary area of low pressure, there is a high wind watch in effect for Nikolsky and Unalaska areas where winds could gust as high as 65 to 75 miles an hour. And we do anticipate the likelihood of high gale force or even storm force winds in the area as that system passes through, with waves building as high as 20 feet there northwest of Nikolsky. And then across the western areas of the state, look for winds strongest 35 to 40 knot gales from the southwest east of St. Paul and St. George, with waves of 16 to 20 feet, locally higher. To the north, winds do come off a bit east to southeast, 20 to 25 knots off of Hooper Bay on up toward Norton Sound, with waves of 8 to 10 feet. And then on Thursday, we'll see that area of low pressure passing just near and west of St. Paul and St. George, with winds 30 knots from the south-southeast ahead of it, waves 9 to 11 feet, and less or so more westerly winds north of Hooper Bay on up into Norton Sound, with waves 5 to 6 feet. And along the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the east-southeast at 15 knots, waves 6-7 feet. And riding down along the northwest coast, winds will be easterly to 20 knots with 8 to 9 foot waves, and more easterly winds out of Kotzebue Sound in the lower portion of the Chukchi Sea, with waves right around 9 feet. And then as we go into the day on Thursday, easterly winds across the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet, turning more northerly down along the lower Chukchi Sea into the Bering Strait at 15 to 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. And a quick check, here is the map over the day on Wednesday. A secondary low developing there between the Kenai and Kodiak Island, the main low approaching Norton Sound. And then for Thursday, that stronger low will be passing north of the eastern Aleutians, bringing that potential for some higher winds around the vicinity of Dutch Harbor.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.